Okay, we are back. Oh my goodness. I don't know what was happening with the last live, but I kept losing my connection like every 10 seconds. And it's really hard to ramble on about something as nerdy as flavors when you're losing your connection. So, hey friends, thank you guys so much for rejoining me here. Hi. I'm so sorry I had to hop off there for a second. I'm not sure what was happening with my connection, but hopefully we are good now. So today we are talking about flavors. If you're just hopping on with me, this is the third in my Cook with Confidence series. 2 weeks ago, I talked about knife skills. Last week, I talked about different cooking methods and why it's important to know about the different cooking methods and which ones to use for the outcome that you want, and that will definitely make you a better cook. And today I'm going to talk about the foundations of flavor. So just to recap, there are three main things you want to think about when we're talking about flavor. The 3 T's are taste, texture, and temperature, and these are going to form the foundation of flavor. You also want to consider the 2 A's, appearance and aroma, but these are less important, especially when you're talking about home cooking, than the 3 T's. So taste, texture, and temperature are what are going to elevate your dish and make your dish taste really delicious. And that's my whole goal, is that you guys feel confident in the kitchen, that you guys feel like you can create meals that are really delicious really easily. My oven is singing to me, so we're just going to take a brief interlude for my oven to sing to me. It's telling me to check on my cauliflower. If you guys came on early with me, I am roasting up some cauliflower with garam masala. Oh, I gotta open it. All right, it is like the slipperiest pan, and I don't want to spill it everywhere. So I am actually cooking a dish with you guys because it's not a cooking class unless I'm cooking with you, right? So what we are making today, and I will explain to you why I am cooking each component as I am, is a garam masala roasted vegetable bowl. And this is a full meal. I've got some lentils that I cooked up for the protein, but you could use whatever protein you like. You could use chicken, you could use beef. And I'm making some really delicious, I wish you could smell this. This is garam masala, a roasted cauliflower, and it still needs a little bit of time, but I'm gonna leave it out for now as I talk to you guys about flavor and why exactly I'm using the flavors I am in this really delicious bowl. All right, so the foundations of flavor, okay? Taste, texture, and temperature are the main things you want to think about when you're thinking about the foundations of flavor. I started to talk to you guys a little bit about taste, but I want to share something else with you first. When we're talking about taste, texture, or temperature, your taste buds are looking for 2 things, okay? Obviously, to create really good flavor, we want taste, texture, and temperature to line up, but in all of these, no matter what we're talking about, your taste buds want variety and your taste buds want balance. So when you are creating a dish and you're like, I feel like it needs a little something else, it's probably because everything either has the same flavors, the same textures, or the same temperatures, and there's no variety in it. There doesn't have to be like a super amount of variety in each one of them, but you want some variety there, or the flavors are imbalanced. You want your flavors to be complementary, not competing. You want your textures to be complementary, not competing. Imagine a dish that is like, everything is soft, right? So you have like mashed potatoes, and then you also have like a carrot puree, and then you also have like slow cooked chicken, and you put it all on a plate. The flavors might be there, but the textures are going to be kind of boring, and you're probably going to be looking for something, okay? So we want complementary, not competing, right? Those are competing for each other. Everything wants to be soft, and we want something that's got a little more oomph to it, if that makes sense. So taste, texture, and temperature, and I'll go through each one, and you want to make sure that it has variety and balance. And that's what I want to teach you guys within each one of these categories. So I started talking about taste, and I was getting ahead of myself. I wanted to make sure that I told you guys about variety and balance and how important they are. But let's talk about the 5 tastes, okay? All of us know the 5 tastes, right? We've got our sweet, our salty, our bitter, our sour, and our umami. I always have to think about it, even though I've been doing this for a decade. I'm like, wait, what is that last one? So the last one, like I was talking about a couple minutes ago before we got shut off, was that umami is that savory flavor. if you're ever eating a dish and you're like, what is that? Unless you're thinking of a specific spice, you're like, what is that thing that makes it so good? Oftentimes it's that umami flavor, that savory flavor. Now you can get this from meat. Most people think of savory as being meat or things like bacon, and those definitely have an umami flavor, but you can also get umami flavor from mushrooms and from soy sauce and from tomato paste and from cheese. So it's not just meat, it's also these other components that give your dish that little extra savory something. It's an important part of our cooking, and it's going to help you take your dish to the next level. So the other flavors, right, or the other taste that we can think of are things like sweet. Well, sweet comes from, we know what sweet comes from. It can come from honey and other liquid sweeteners like maple syrup or agave, and then obviously sugar, but it also comes from fruit and dried fruit. So those are generally your main sweet flavors. And then there are also some spices that have a sweet component to them as well. For instance, I've got my cinnamon here. Cinnamon is a little sweet and a little bit bitter. There are also vegetables that come out of the oven sweeter, or come out of the pan or out of the pot sweeter than when you put them in. When you caramelize vegetables or when you cook vegetables, some of their natural sugars release from them. So things like carrots, which I also have in the oven, start to become sweeter. And so that can also be the sweet component of a dish. There's also sour, and sour typically comes from things like your citrus and your vinegars, and then also tomatoes. Typically, you're talking like whole tomatoes or fresh tomatoes are more sour versus concentrated tomatoes tend to be more umami, more savory. You've got your bitter, and bitter comes from things like I did mention, cinnamon, especially when it's not cooked, can have a little bit of a bitterness to it. Cocoa powder, coffee, those cumin has a little bit of a bitterness to it, so some spices have some bitterness to them. Raw garlic has some bitterness to it, but it's much less bitter once you roast it up. That's one of the reasons why roasting garlic makes it so delicious. And then you also have, so sweet, sour, what did I forget? Salty. Oh, salty. Oh, can't forget about salty. Well, obviously we know that salt is salty, but there's also plenty of other foods that also have a salty component. So we know that soy sauce is umami, but it's also salty as well. There are things like salted fish or brined meats. There are also olives, and what else was I thinking of? Cheeses are also salty. So all of these different elements of taste, okay, are what add part of what adds flavor to our meals. And like I said, our goal is always to have a variety and balance. We want to complement the different flavors. And if I can get it to work, I actually want to share with you guys. Let me see. All right. Whoa, I made it work, you guys. I'm learning new things. This is the flavor wheel, okay? And I literally, because I'm a nerd, created this morning to share with you guys because I have it like as a drawing that I draw out that, you know, I learned way back in culinary school years ago. And if you guys want this, I'll put it up in my stories after this. But basically, the goal here is to just start to learn what flavors balance each other out. So we know, for instance, okay, and spice is its own, that's temperature. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But for instance, we know that sweet and salty balance each other out really well. So think of salted caramel. How much more delicious does it make the sweet? How much more delicious is something that's salty if you add a little bit of sweet to it? We also know something like salt balances out bitter, okay? So something like kale, when you add a little bit of salt to it, it balances out some of that bitterness. We also know something like sour enhances umami. So when you add something like rice vinegar, so if you're thinking of Asian cooking, if you add something like rice vinegar to something that's umami, it's going to enhance that flavor. Same thing with sweet. Sweet also enhances that umami savory flavor. Or if you think about adding something sweet, if you're slow cooking meat and you're making barbecue sauce, that's gonna enhance that umami flavor. So I'm gonna go ahead and, I don't even know if I know how to take that off. Meh. We're gonna leave it. I don't know how to take it off. I put it on, I don't know how to take it off. Oh my gosh, you guys. There we go, we're good. I hope that was helpful for you guys. I can put it up in my stories after if you want to start learning what complements each other. We're not gonna learn all of that today. I taught entire cooking courses on learning how to balance flavors, but all I want you to know, all I want you to recognize is that there are different flavors within our food. And our goal is just for variety and for balance. For the most part, having just a variety of different flavors. You don't need every single one of those tastes within your dish, but having a variety of different flavors or a variety of different tastes within your dish is going to make it more interesting. And that's what your taste buds want. They want variety and they want balance. So they don't want something, when I say balance, I mean, you don't want something that's all salty, right? You want something, if it's super salty, you might want to balance that out with a little bit of sour or a little bit sweet. You don't want something that's overly sour. You're gonna want to balance that out with something a little bit sweet. Think about making lemonade, okay? If you've ever made homemade lemonade before, lemons are naturally very sour, and sour is one of our tastes and it's appealing, but you add sugar to it or you add honey to it to balance it out. And when you get to the point where your taste buds are like, ooh, that's good, that tastes good, that's balance. You are just balancing the sour and the sweet together. It doesn't have to be crazy complicated. It's just knowing there are these 5 flavors and these 5 tastes, I'm sorry. We're talking all about flavor. There are these 5 tastes and learning how to balance them and learning what goes with each other and what doesn't. One of my favorite resources, I should have brought it with me. I'm in my parents' kitchen if you guys don't know that. That's where I teach these classes because mine is much too small to be able to actually move around as much as I like to do in the kitchen. So the book is called The Flavor Bible, and you can get it on Amazon, and I've had it. My copy is falling apart. It's from culinary school almost 11 years ago, and it is a brilliant resource, especially for different cuisines, learning what types of foods go together. So if you are a novice cook and you want to learn more about how to become a better cook, and especially when it comes to flavors, The Flavor Bible is the Flavor Bible. It is amazing. I wish I could tell you the authors off the top of my head. I can't, but it's great. Look it up on Amazon. It's awesome. So let's talk about texture for a second, okay? Here's something that I am currently adding some texture to. Like I mentioned before with the chicken, and I'm just like thinking about it going like, oh, that doesn't sound very good. That sounds kind of like baby food when I'm talking about like mashed potatoes and pureed carrots and slow cooked meat or like slow cooked chicken or something like that. All of those things are fine in and of themselves, but you don't want them all together because your brain craves different textures. One of the ways that we can get textures within our dish is by cooking our foods a different way. Rather than cooking them all the same way and preparing them all the same way, it's going, okay, how can I add some texture to my dish for that interest, right? For that variety and that balance, so it's not all the same texture. So right now, I am roasting up this cauliflower. It's so good. But it needs a couple more minutes. So I'm gonna put it back in the oven because I don't want it to be raw. We'll talk about temperature in a second. I want it to be soft, but I want it to be crispy. One of the best ways that you can do that with vegetables, by the way, is making sure that you are not overcrowding them in the pan. So I have a lot right here. I'm gonna spill them everywhere. I've got a lot on the pan here, but there's space in between them because you want that air to circulate. I talked about that when I talked about cooking methods last week. All right, we're gonna put that baby in for a couple of minutes. But here's a really good example. So these garam masala roasted vegetable bowls that I'm making combine a bunch of different complementary flavors, okay, as well as complementary textures. So I have my cauliflower that is very kind of bland in and of itself. It's just cauliflower. And I know there are all those jokes on the internet about like, if cauliflower can become pizza and rice and whatever, then you can be anything you want to be, which I fully believe. I don't think cauliflower needs to replace those things, but it's pretty amazing that cauliflower is just very neutral and it can transform into a lot of different things, but it's kind of bland in and of itself. So we want to add some extra flavor to it. So obviously, I always add a little bit of salt, okay? You never want your food to taste salty. You want it to be salted. So I always will talk about salt next week, but I always salt, especially vegetables, before I put them in the oven. Never salt your vegetables after. Please promise me you won't. Salt them before. The salt needs time to diffuse into the vegetables. So I added some salt. And then I added garam masala. If you guys have not ever tried garam masala, this is like it's a Middle Eastern Indian spice blend, and I'll even read you the ingredients. So it says spices on this one. This is what I love, by the way. This is the, just like the McCormick Gourmet, but they do a really good job with this garam masala. You could make your own, but you know, I'm all about ease in the kitchen. This is coriander, black pepper, cumin, cardamom, and cinnamon. And it has a really delicious kind of, it's very spiced, but not spicy. and it has a very delicious warming flavor to it. So I know just adding this garam masala, a little pinch of salt, and a little bit of olive oil and tossing that together and putting it in a 375-degree oven is going to add some really incredible taste. By putting it in the oven and roasting it, it's going to add some really incredible texture, okay? I'm going to add some bite to that cauliflower, and I'm also going to add some of that caramelization on the outside of the cauliflower as long as I don't overcrowd it in the pan. And I also have some carrots that I'm throwing in there as well. And I'm looking for a similar texture to the cauliflower, but we know that cauliflower and carrots have different textures in and of themselves. So depending on how long you put it in the oven and depending on, you know, what you want out of it, whether you want to cut it into, one of the other ways that you can add texture is just by cutting into different shapes. So I have the carrots in the oven in like bâtonnet, which is like the French fry shape, rather than have it in chunks like the cauliflower. It just adds a little bit more of that variety. It's one very, very simple thing you can do, just changing the shape of your vegetables to add some extra variety. So even though I am roasting both of them, I'm roasting them with different flavors for a different taste, for complementary taste. The complementary spices that I'm using in the carrots, by the way, are cumin, which has a little bit of a bitter and umami flavor to it, and cinnamon, which has, especially when cooked, more of a sweet, slightly bitter flavor to it. And because carrots are sweet, especially when they're cooked, it's going to enhance the flavor of the carrots, like we're talking about in the flavor wheel. And a little bit of salt, of course, because we want our food seasoned. So the tastes are complementary, the textures are similar, but I made them different and added some variety just by changing the shape of the vegetables. I hope that makes sense. The other thing I'm doing to add some more texture within the dish is I'm serving it with some lentils, which are quite soft. And we're gonna do it on a base of rice, which has a little bit more bite to it. So there's that little bit of variety there. So we've got the base of rice, we've got the soft lentils, and most proteins end up being pretty soft unless you're like grilling up a steak or something like that. So we got the soft lentils, we have the rice that has a little bit of a bite to it, we have the crispy vegetables, and then I also am going to have some kale on top. And I'm not gonna cook this up right now just because we're not eating until like 6 o'clock tonight and I don't wanna have like super wilty kale. But this is another way that you can totally change the texture of a dish by deciding what you're gonna do with this kale, okay? Because this is just a regular old bag of kale. Obviously, you could change the flavor. You can completely change the flavor by adding some garlic to this. You could completely change the flavor by adding some lemon to it while it's cooking for both of those, by the way. Raw garlic on kale is gonna be a bit intense. But you could braise the kale. So that would mean cooking it with a little bit of liquid. That is going to have a very different texture than if you saute the kale. So here's what I want you to consider, okay? I want you to consider some of your favorite food textures. So I want you to consider some of those adjectives, right? I'm homeschooling my 7-year-old right now. So with some of those adjectives that you would use to describe food, okay? So maybe it's creamy, maybe it's soft, maybe it's crunchy, maybe it's crisp. I have some in front of me, you guys, because I don't think of all these off the top of my head. Chewy or doughy, like a pizza crust. Fluffy or delicate, like a mousse. Hearty or rich, like a soup or a stew that's got a lot of fat on it, or something like a pulled pork or something like that is going to be hearty and rich, right? So think of those different textures and consider which of those are your favorite textures and bring more of that into your cooking. That in and of itself is just going to add some variety to your cooking. And also consider that you don't want all of the same texture in your meal. Where can you add one new texture within your meal? So for my dish that I'm making tonight, right, I've got my rice, I've got my lentils, and again, you could use whatever protein you want on here. And the lentils are cooked in vegetable broth, so it adds just a little bit of flavor. I season it a little bit with salt, but the vegetables are very heavily spiced. So it's okay if I put something alongside it that's a little bit more bland. We don't want our flavors to compete with each other. We want them to be complementary. So where we might have some heavily spiced, very robust cauliflower and carrots that have a lot of flavor to them, then we still want to make sure we're seasoning our other ingredients. But our kale is just going to be sauteed in some olive oil and I'll probably use avocado oil, but some avocado oil and some salt. Could add some garlic to it if you really like garlic. We do in our house. And then the rice and the lentils that are a little less flavorful, but they're still well seasoned. So that's texture. Let's talk about temperature. Okay, so their temperature has two parts to it, and this is important. When we think of temperature, oftentimes we think of hot and cold. But temperature is physical. It is hot and cold, or raw or cooked, and we want a variety of that in many of our dishes as well. We don't need to have raw and cooked in any dish, but think of like a taco that has some sort of a protein or a vegetable on it, and then some raw cabbage and some raw cilantro on it, and then the raw or the slaw or a slaw or something like that, and the raw cabbage or the slaw on it really complements the hot protein or the hot vegetables, and then the cooling cilantro on top with maybe a sauce on there. That's where those different temperatures are complementing each other. But there's two things happening here, okay? There is the physical temperature, so hot and cold, or raw and cooked. Those are different and the same. They can be different, they can be the same. And then there's also perceived temperature, okay? And so this is like spicy or cooling, right? So something that's spicy, pretty obvious, hot peppers, hot sauce, cayenne pepper, chili powder. All of these are going to be spicy. There are other things that are spicy, but those are the things that come to the top of my brain. But those are your main kind of spicy ingredients, and that is going to feel hot in your mouth. You can counteract that with perceived coolness. So an example of this is yogurt. Yogurt has and yes, it's coming from the fridge. It is a little bit cold, but it's not ice cold. The coolness comes from the perceived coolness of the actual yogurt. So think of Indian food. Oftentimes it is served with, or Middle Eastern food. Heavily spiced food is oftentimes served with yogurt sauces, which is what I typically serve this dish with, is a dill yogurt sauce. I'm eating with my sister tonight, and she doesn't love dill, so I decided to opt out of the yogurt sauce tonight. But it's a great way to just add some complementary flavor to a dish that's heavily spiced. I'll show you in just a second what I'm actually going to make along with this and show you how I combine some flavors in just a second. I do have to check on my cauliflower so it doesn't get too crispy, but just know that adding some difference in temperature, some variety and some balance in temperature can really elevate your dish. It can really elevate your food. So this is perceived. If something's too spicy, adding something cooling. As you saw in the flavor wheel, sweet and sour also counteract spicy. So if something's a little bit extra spicy, you can add something cooling, like yogurt, or mint is also cooling as well. If you have ever used like a peppermint essential oil before and it makes you feel cold, that is because that is the perceived coolness. I'm gonna go ahead and take out this cauliflower before I burn something. Oh yes. Okay, you guys, this is a great example of changing the texture just by cooking it. Okay, do you see how there is some of that garam masala on there? Woo, this is hot. There's some of that garam masala on there. Oh my gosh, so good. And because I had it at the right temperature, it also completely changed texture. From raw cauliflower, which is very firm and doesn't always have the best mouthfeel, to something that is, and I'm just gonna keep eating this, soft on the inside and crispy on the outside, and is very, very appealing to our taste buds. Okay, I'm gonna stop. I also have some carrots in there. However, carrots are a little bit more fibrous and take a little bit more time to get soft. So we're gonna check on them. Ooh, but they look good. It's a great example of using the same cooking technique. Remember we talked about cooking methods yesterday, and having a completely different result when it comes to texture. So these are some really delicious roasted carrots. Like I said, I roasted these with cinnamon. Sorry, that's cumin. With cumin and cinnamon and some sea salt. And I roasted them in, don't do this at home. I have no feeling in my fingers. If you want to lose feeling in your fingers, become a chef. So there, these are purple carrots, by the way. This is not burnt. I've got orange here too, but they are deliciously, this is even hot for me. crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, but they are different than the cauliflower because the texture is a little bit different. Does that make sense? Okay. So you guys, I used to teach a 2-hour cooking class on the foundations of flavor because I love it so much. So I could talk so much more about this, but here are the things I want you to take away from this, okay? I want you to take away from the fact that the 3 flavor factors are taste, texture, and temperature. Know that in all of these, what our taste buds are looking for is variety and balance. We can get variety and balance by having more than one different taste and learning the different tastes that complement each other. Sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami, and complementing the flavors, just getting to know that. One of the best ways we can do that is by starting to look at the different cuisines that we love and start to notice the different ingredients that are paired together in different cuisines. If the easiest way to balance your meal, if you feel like you're missing a bit of something, is when you're cooking your meal, ask yourself if everything is the same taste, if everything has the same texture, or if everything has the same temperature, and just adding in a little bit. So salt is always something that a lot of people miss out on. We're afraid of salt. Do not be afraid of salt, but salt as you go. You want your food, again, to be seasoned, not salty. Acid helps to brighten a dish, so adding some sourness to it. So I'm going to share with you the sauce I'm going to use in just a second. So adding a little bit of acid to a dish can brighten the dish, and it also balances out something that might taste a little bit too salty or something that is a little bit too spicy. In adding something that has a different texture to it can be really helpful as well to elevate your dish and to take it from being like, to so much more delicious. And then also asking yourself if it could use a little bit of a temperature change. So a really good example of this is Thai cooking they have a lot of really delicious, oh my gosh, Thai food is just so beautifully balanced. So if you think of a Thai curry that has a slightly spicy curry paste, and you add the coconut milk, which has, I'm going to tell you in a second, but your coconut milk in any of your curries has some fat in it, and that adds mouthfeel, and that's one of the most important things for texture. Oftentimes it has something with a little bit of acidity in it, like tamarind paste. Sometimes they use some coconut sugar in there for a little bit of sweetness, and they oftentimes combine cooked elements with raw elements. So whether that is putting some raw basil on top, or some raw mango, or some raw peppers on top. So they're combining the different tastes, balancing the tastes, textures, cooked and raw have different textures, and then they also have those different perceived temperatures. Whoa, hello. The other thing I forgot to mention, and I've talked about this before, but you need to make sure that your dishes have some sort of a fat in them, because fat adds mouthfeel, and it is one of the most important elements in the culinary world to making your dish taste delicious. Yes, taste delicious, because texture is important. So it is important to consider the different textures that are going to be in your dish. But if your dish has no fat in it, so think like steamed broccoli, plain rice, and like plain chicken breast, it's not very appealing to our taste buds. It might fill you up, but it's not going to be appealing to your taste buds. So I love adding sauces or making sure that we're roasting our vegetables with some sort of an oil or some sort of a fat, and that is just going to increase the mouthfeel, okay? I've been asked over my decade of being a chef, what are the secrets to cooking? First of all, the secrets to cooking are this. Chefs understand these things, the flavor foundations. They understand taste, they understand texture, they understand temperature. They are also not afraid of salt, and they are not afraid of fat. And that doesn't mean that your dish needs to be like loaded, right? But it just means that you use it for mouthfeel and for flavor, okay? So I am going to make a really delicious tahini sauce that is a really good example of balancing some flavors. And this is what we're gonna put on top of our roasted vegetable bowls tonight. And if you guys have any questions, because I know I talked to you guys a ton, what I didn't finish saying and what I did want to, I guess I told you guys about Thai food. Look at some of the cuisines that you love and the ingredients that they use and the flavors that they use, and that'll give you a really good indicator of some of the things that you love, and just experiment with those in your cooking. And it'll help you to become a better cook. Okay, so I've got tahini sauce. Tahini already has the mouthfeel of a fat, which is creamy, but it's also a little bit sticky. So it could use something to thin it out a little bit. And it's also fairly bitter in and of itself. So it's got the creaminess, but it's a little bit bitter. And I dipped my strainer in the tahini sauce. I'm gonna add some lemon juice to it to balance out the bitterness. I'm gonna add a little bit of sour to that, okay? My favorite way to make tahini sauce is to use roasted garlic. We don't have roasted garlic. We've got raw garlic, but that's okay. When you combine the raw garlic with the lemon juice, it takes it down a notch and it doesn't taste so intense. And also, it depends on how big a garlic clove you use and how much you like garlic. That is gonna determine how intense it is. So I'm gonna go ahead. I finally got a new microplane. Any of you have been around for a while. And I had this whole Amazon debacle with not being able to have my microplane delivered, but I've got one now. It's not the one I wanted, but it'll do. It's a good one. It's from the brand OXO, which is one of my, I don't know if you say it OXO or OXO, but it's one of my favorite kitchen brands. They do a good job with their kitchen equipment. They last a long time, and that's important to me. So I'm gonna grate in the garlic. Whoopsies. Hello. Make sure you get it in the bowl. I'm gonna add a big old pinch of cumin, which my great-grandmother was from the Middle East, so I love Middle Eastern flavors. Love me some cumin. And my inspiration for learning how to cook really started with learning some of the delicious foods that she would make and that really no one else in my family knew how to make when I was a kid, and I learned how to make them. And then eventually I studied abroad in Italy and decided that I wanted to be a chef as part of my education. So after nutrition school, I went to culinary school and worked as a chef for many years. I'm gonna add some salt to it because we need some saltiness to it. And now it looks like a big glob of that. Not great. Let's change the texture and add a little bit of water to it. And we're just gonna keep whisking. Oh, hey, Dad. I think my dad is at work. Making my tuna salad for lunch, Dana. I love it. Oh my gosh. I think my dad is at work watching this, or he was. I love it. So fun. Actually, my dad was also one of my inspirations for learning how to cook. My dad worked at an Italian restaurant for many years when I was a kiddo, and I remember him cooking for us on occasion because he worked so much. More water. But he always did a great job, and I always wanted to know what he did. And we're just gonna whisk and whisk and whisk and whisk until it has a really delicious texture that's appealing to you. So there are no rights and wrongs when it comes to combining flavors that taste good for you. Ultimately, keep experimenting, find combinations that you love, and get inspiration from the ingredients that are used together in different cuisines, from understanding the foundations of flavor, from learning how to balance with salt and acid, making sure that your dishes have some fat in them for some mouthfeel, experimenting with different textures, and those perceived temperatures too. So balancing things like spicy and cooling foods, and then also trying out maybe adding something raw to the top of your cooked dish, or something cooked to the top of your raw dish, like roasted vegetables on a salad. So good. And just those little differences in taste, texture, and temperature can make a really huge difference when it comes to making our food that much more delicious and really just elevating our everyday meals. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. I could talk about this for hours more. If you have any questions about this at all, feel free to reach out, shoot me a DM. I love talking cooking, and I promise we've got some more cooking stuff up our sleeves in the healthy, balanced mama world. So stay tuned for that. All right, friends, have a beautiful rest of your Thursday. I'm gonna finish up my prep, hop onto some calls, and then we're gonna come back and enjoy this. Have a great rest of your Thursday, guys. I will see you next week. Same time, same place for seasoning. So I talked to you about flavors this week, But next week, I am going to tell you how to use salt to your advantage. It is going to be so fun.